start talking to every living soul you know. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell strangers in the grocery store about this constitutional amendment, and make sure they know that it is not about process. This is about whether there's going to be the separation of powers and democracy in Kansas or not. That's what's really on the ballot, and we got to make sure that every living soul knows that when they read the ballot language on that date you have circled on your calendar, August 4th, 2026. We got to make sure they know what the real story is.
Hey there. In 1896, Kansas journalist William Allen White published a newspaper editorial entitled, "What's the Matter with Kansas?" White's piece, which he later described as having been written in haste and also in vitriol, criticized then presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan, who at the time was advocating for the free silver standard. Don't worry, I'm not gonna make you learn what that is. All you need to know is that this headline became iconic, making White, who was in his late 20s at the time, a household name. The phrase, "What's the matter with Kansas?" is so well known, in fact, that in 2004, journalist and historian Thomas Frank wrote a book with the same title, attempting to explain the rise of political conservatism. So now that this phrase is in the popular lexicon, perhaps now is as good a time as any to ask, sincerely, what's the matter with Kansas? Well, it's complicated. I guess I could start with Kansas City, since that always confuses outsiders. Yes, there's a Kansas City, Missouri, and a Kansas City, Kansas. Also, they're right next to each other because they're sister cities. No, I don't know why. I wasn't put in charge. Are we good? Anyways, as someone who was born on the Missouri side but raised on the Kansas side, I have come to view my resident state as nuanced. While this remains the unceded land of numerous diverse indigenous tribes who endured suffering of unprecedented levels, we did also fight a literal battle in order to keep this state from becoming a slave state. And you may have even heard about our most famous fighter. So regardless of what you might see in the media, Kansas is a bit more complex these days. It'd be easy to lump us all in as dumb country folk who keep voting red as if we don't know what's good for us, but that ignores a few key distinctions. Like our current governor, a former school teacher who has been vocally supportive of trans children, only for state Republicans to secretly and surreptitiously ram a bathroom bill through without any public debate. Or Congressional Representative Sharice Davids, the first openly LGBT Native American elected to the United States Congress, whose state Republicans keep trying to gerrymander out. Or the fact that in 2022, we did vote in a referendum to protect the right to an abortion. Because, despite what you may have heard, this is a free state. Anyways, 2022 was a long time ago. I wonder if that's influenced anything to come. Foreshadowing is a literary device, so this August, in addition to your standard primaries, has something else. Something interesting. And something that someone sure seems to have tried to slip under the radar. Constitutional Amendment. Elections for Supreme Court Justices. This amendment gives the voters the right to elect the justices of the Kansas Supreme Court. Huh. That doesn't seem so bad. Wonder why I haven't heard too much about it. The Kansas legislature is putting forth quite the effort to amend Article 3 of the Kansas Constitution. See, the existing structure for the 7 Supreme Court justices of the state of Kansas is via a system that has been in place since 1959, and it's a bit more involved than a direct election. I'll explain. Our current system is an assisted appointment method. Kansas has 4 districts, and when there's a Supreme Court vacancy, we go to the Nominating Commission, a commission consisting of 1 lawyer and 1 non-lawyer from each congressional district, plus 1 additional lawyer who serves as a chairperson. The 4 non-lawyers are appointed by the governor. 4 lawyers are elected by members of the Kansas State Bar in each congressional district. The 5th lawyer is elected by a statewide vote of members of the Kansas State Bar. This is already quite a thorough process. In fact, many in the Kansas legal profession have said such efforts encourage them to be at the very top of their professional game. The nominating commission provides the names of the nominees to the governor, who then selects a justice from that list. Unless you think the will of the people is left out of the conversation entirely, allow me to explain what happens next. Newly appointed justices serve for at least 1 year, after which they must stand for retention in the next even year general election. If retained, the justice serves a 6-year term and must stand for retention every 6 years after that point to remain in office. So if this system, which has existed for decades and does seem to be exhaustively effective, why would we want to change that? And why would organizations like the Kansas ACLU and the Kansas Bar Association be so against this proposed change? Alright, I didn't want to do this to you all, but in order to explain this, I am going to have to talk about Chris Kobach. I know. I'm sorry. For those of you blissfully unaware, Chris Kobach is currently serving as the Kansas Attorney General. After an unsuccessful congressional campaign in 2004, followed by an unsuccessful gubernatorial campaign in 2018, followed by a still unsuccessful U.S. Senate campaign in 2020, he was elected Attorney General of Kansas in 2022. I'll give him this. He is relentless. But while his hubris has kept him in the public eye, he hasn't exactly been a fan favorite. A 2024 exit poll of Kansas voters found his approval rating was at a whopping 34%, which feels high. I've heard unsubstantiated rumors that it's currently as low as 15%, which feels high. Look, I don't want to dedicate any more of my brain space to this man. I have but one precious life. His gross incompetence could fill a whole video, but for our purposes, what you need to know, because it both tells you the type of person that he is and is also very funny, is this. In late March 2019, the Associated Press reported that President Donald Trump was considering creating a post of immigration czar to coordinate efforts among federal agencies involved in the issues, with Kobach being one of 2 top candidates for the job. In the spring of 2019, Kobach presented a 10-point list of conditions that would have to be fulfilled for him to be Trump's immigration czar. Some Trump administration officials were shocked by Kobach's presumptuousness. The position would not require Senate confirmation. Trump, however, was certain Kobach would have difficulty winning Senate confirmation for the position. Do you get it now? Let's rewind in time a little bit. Remember that 2022 referendum I mentioned earlier? The one where Kansans voted to keep the right to an abortion? Yeah, there was a little bit more to that than I let on, but you probably knew that. Time for a quick recap. Abortion has always been a touchy subject in the state of Kansas, but that was kicked into high gear with the proposed amendment to the Kansas Constitution. If enacted, the amendment would have declared that the Kansas Constitution does not guarantee a right to an abortion, giving the Kansas state government power to prosecute individuals involved in abortions, and further declared that the Kansas government is not required to fund abortions. Called the Value Them Both Amendment. Yes. Really, this referendum was held in August, a move that many criticized as an effort to suppress voter turnout, given that these kind of elections typically see around 20% of the eligible voter population at the polls. So given all this, the language of the bill, the timing, the turnout, Kansans were really going to need to kick it into high gear if they wanted to protect the right to a safe and legal abortion. And they did. By a lot. An estimated 557,837 registered voters voted no, and with a majority of nearly 60%, abortion was safe. Voter turnout was surprisingly high, estimated to be nearly 50% of the eligible voting population at the time. And so, having heard the will of the people, Chris Kobach conceded, realizing that democracy had won. And no, I'm just kidding. Of course he didn't. He's trying harder now. You know how now conservatives will just tell you the ghoulish shit they're trying to do, whereas before they kind of had to couch it in secretive language? Chris Kobach never learned that skill. And following the 2022 referendum, he basically said the quiet part out loud. In September 2022, a month after the referendum, this article appeared in the Wichita Eagle. Republican Attorney General candidate Chris Kobach has unveiled a new strategy for removing abortion rights from the state constitution, a month after Kansas voters affirmed those rights by a wide margin. Kobach, formerly Secretary of State, is calling on the GOP-dominated legislature to put forward another ballot question that would amend the state's constitution. This time, it would not address abortion rights directly. Instead, it would ask voters whether Kansas Supreme Court justices should be selected by direct election. The change, Kobach said, would clear a path for the state to slowly and quietly place anti-abortion judges on the state's high court, with the ultimate goal of overturning the Kansas Supreme Court's 2019 Hodes decision that found the state constitution includes the right to an abortion. Kobach said the Hodes decision threw a huge wrench into the work of the anti-abortion movement in Kansas. Now, there are two ways to deal with that, Kobach said. There are two paths. One is to come in with a state constitutional amendment that corrects the decision. That's what we just tried to do, and it didn't work out. But there's another path. Electing justices by popular vote is the next best option for overturning the Hodes decision, Kobach said. He just can't help himself, can he? Now, all of that would be bad enough, but there is a reason why so many organizations oppose direct judicial elections. Just this year, the Wisconsin Supreme Court held their latest judicial election, with a record $100 million spent on a single seat. Notably, friendless loser Elon Musk threw in an estimated $17 million in the fray in an attempt to influence an election in a state he does not and has never resided in. And he lost, but you knew that. And while outside billionaires certainly are a threat, Kansas has its own billionaire scourge. The Koch brothers, head of Koch Industries, a company that, according to Bloomberg, has amassed more than $400 million in fines, penalties, and judgments from 1999 to 2003. So that's the big secret. That's why it's so important to vote no on this proposed amendment in August. But friends, it gets worse, because it would appear that voter suppression is already in high gear. Now, I already mentioned that this would be on the ballot in August, which has historically low voter turnout. But I wonder if the ghouls involved didn't learn a thing or two from the last time and decided to put an extra provision in place. I was out canvassing last weekend when we got news that 8 advanced voting sites had been eliminated in Johnson County. You know, the county that tends to vote blue. And don't worry, it wasn't a funding issue. The funding was already there. The sites are just gone now. Those included 2 libraries and the largest community college in the state. This announcement came from Johnson County's interim election commissioner Connie Schmidt, who then promptly left on vacation, leaving commissioners baffled. Connie Schmidt has served in this role before and was largely regarded positively, hence the surprise. Some have speculated that this was pressure from Secretary of State Scott Schwab, given that our previous full-time election commissioner Fred Sherman abruptly resigned in December, citing strange, unnamed policy differences with Schwab. He's also running for governor, because of course he is. When investigators finally got a hold of Schmidt, they found her less than understanding. "Oh, for goodness sakes, voting is my passion," Schmidt said. "I'm the farthest thing from that," she said, referring to partisanship. "I don't care who wins. I treat everybody the same. I'm happiest when every voter that's eligible to vote casts a ballot in every election." Sure. Schmidt went on to say that all of the locations and their hours created a hodgepodge of confusion. She also said this: "Voters are creatures of habit. they tend to go back to the same place where they went before. Gee, Connie, those creatures of habit sure sound like they had a polling location that worked for them. Hate to see that go away. Also, when I tried to submit a public comment for the next Board of County Commissioners meeting, this happened. But that is what we're up against. When the question, "What's the matter with Kansas?" is asked, this is the answer. Leadership hell-bent on ignoring the will of the people and actively suppressing their right to a say in their state so they can enact their own twisted agenda. This is what we're up against. Now, if you're in Kansas, don't worry, there's still things you can do. There are still some early voting sites, and you can find yours at myvoteinfo.votechaos.org. Early voting begins July 15th. You can also do in-person canvassing and phone banking to spread the word, since I estimate many Kansans don't even know about this election, let alone why you should vote no. And hey, Kansan or not, you can still contact Election Commissioner Connie Schmidt and Secretary of State Scott Schwab and tell them we want those 8 voting locations that have been fully funded already and are now planned for closure. And look, I know this already seems hopeless, but I don't want to give up yet. They tried to take away our right to reproductive care. I don't want them to take away our democracy too. We can stop this. All we have to do is say no.